Hello, everyone. Welcome. Nice to have you here. I'm Stephen Sachs. I'm the artistic director of the Fountain Theater in Los Angeles, and welcome to Theater Talk. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are streaming live on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, Zoom, and on our Fountain Theater website. And if you're watching on Zoom and you have a question for our guest, please type it into the Q&A balloon at the bottom of your screen there. And if you're watching on Facebook, type your question in the chat. And I'm very excited about today's program. Our guest today was born and raised in Los Angeles to a show business family. He is an actor on TV, on film, stage, and in more than 100 commercials. In 2007, he founded Ebony Repertory Theatre, the first African-American professional equity theater company in Los Angeles history, where he serves as its producing artistic director. And under his leadership, Ebony Rep has produced award-winning productions of Two Trains Running by August Wilson, Regina Taylor's Crowns, A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry, Jeff Stetson's Fraternity, Robeson by Philip Hayes Dean, the musical Five Guys Named Mo, The Gospel of Colonus, and more. It's my sincere pleasure and with great affection that I welcome Wren Brown.
Stephen Sachs.
There you are.
Here I am, Stephen. I'm just honored to be with you and the Fountain Theater family. Thank you for having me on today.
Oh, what a pleasure. What a pleasure. I'm just so thrilled. It's great to see you. I was thinking about you. I've been thinking about you and how your origin story yourself,
yes,
and the origin story of Ebony Rep, to me is so fascinating and so intertwined because you were born and raised here in Los Angeles.
Yes.
And you grew up, I mean, literally around the corner from the old Ebony Showcase, right?
That's correct.
On Washington Boulevard, which would, of course, become the Nate Holden Performing Arts Center and the home of Ebony Rep. So tell me about that. What was the neighborhood around Washington Boulevard like at that time?
We had an extraordinary neighborhood here. I was born at 1926 Rempal Boulevard, which is 150 yards from the front door of the Nate Holden Performing Arts Center. We had a neighborhood, Stephen, that had all the goods and services of a neighborhood. We had a wonderful supermarket. We had a See's Candy on Washington Boulevard, a Ralph's Supermarket. We had several banks, Security Pacific Bank, Bank of America, Crocker Citizen Bank on Washington Boulevard. We had a plethora of jazz clubs along Washington Boulevard. Right at La Brea, we had the Great Parisian Room. One block to the east, we had Tommy Tucker's Playroom. Right across from the old Ebony Showcase Theater, there was the It Club. And just down the street, there was the Hillcrest Club. So there was wonderful, wonderful nightlife and extraordinary jazz along Washington Boulevard. I mean, culturally just vibrant. Shoeshine parlors, Reverend Broadnax, and all of these people here, it was just rich. Miss Waverly made the best hamburger in the world. Dr. and Mrs. Lee had the pharmacy. Mr. Darling had the cleaners right at our corner. So we had a rich and vibrant community. And interestingly enough, a community that was really met with so many artists live around this community. You may have seen a film called The Well many years ago. Well, Mr. Ernest Anderson was in The Well. And of course, Mr. Nick Stewart played Lightning in Amos and Andy. And on my street, Miss Ernestine Wade, she played Sapphire on Amos and Andy. She lived right down the street from me. So rich community with artists. And again, it was a real community with all the goods and services of one. And so our time here has been rich, and walking past the Ebony Showcase as a child just really informed my life in a very deep and abiding way. Mr. and Mrs. Nick Stewart had a tremendous vision. They founded the Ebony Showcase Theater in 1950 elsewhere, but they purchased the property here at 4718 in 1966. And so in about 1970, I was walking with three of my older siblings. I have four older siblings. And I said to my sister, I said, "What is that?" And she said, that's a marquee. And the marquee said Ebony Showcase Theater. And so when 2007 came around, and I was thinking about what should we name this company that we are beginning, the first marquee I'd ever seen was Ebony Showcase Theater, and Ebony Repertory Theater was named in honor of the first marquee I ever saw.
Now, your parents and your family, you come from a show business family, a theatrical family, right? A musical family as well?
A musical and theatrical family. I use the T in my name, Wren T. Brown. My name is Wren Troy Brown. My paternal grandfather, Troy Brown Sr., was the 5th Black Actor in Screen Actors Guild, and he joined Actors Equity in 1936. My father, Troy Brown Jr., joined Actors Equity in 1939 as a 7-year-old. So that rich tradition, both of my grandmothers were Cotton Club dancers. My maternal grandfather was the first Black staff musician in the history of Hollywood. He was on the staff at Columbia Pictures in 1946. He became for 25 years the drummer and musical director for Nat King Cole. He was on the Nat King Cole show that, was really talked about heavily in terms of the first presence of a Black host of a television show, and how Madison Avenue didn't really have the gumption to properly support this giant Nat King Cole. But my grandfather, his brother, was the saxophonist Lester Young, who named Billie Holiday Lady Day. That was my great uncle. Yes. And their father, William Handy Young, called Papa Young affectionately, he was a man who started his own theatrical troupe in the aughts of the 20th century. It was called the New Orleans Strutters. So I'm a 4th generation theatrical.
Wow, that's just astounding.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Did you, so many of us, I think in the theater had a moment when we were young. I mean, it was so much in your family, obviously, it was around you constantly. But so many of us who have chosen a career in the theater have a moment, an aha moment or an epiphany where when we were little, or perhaps a teenager, when we either saw a play for the first time or a teacher opened a new world for us and made us realize that this was the path that we wanted to take. Did you have a magic moment that you recall that the light kind of went on in your mind, that this is what I want to do with the rest of my life, or was it always there?
I had 3 magic moments. The first one was at about 5 years old, and my only sister encouraged me in an abiding fashion because I had a capacity for communication, and I felt something very special in my heart and in my life surrounding communication. I didn't know if I would be a broadcast journalist, if it would be a ministerial communicative moment, or as an actor or as a theatrical, but I felt something very, very, very prominently in my spirit at about 5 years old. And then when I was in the 6th grade, my 6th grade teacher, the greatest educational influence on my life, Mrs. Aladine Markham, she walked me into my purpose, because she gave me James Baldwin, she gave me Gwendolyn Brooks, Langston Hughes, she gave me Elizabeth Barrett Browning, she gave me John Donne, she gave me Wordsworth. I mean, just all of these wonderful poems and pieces of literature. And we did the first time I ever appeared on television I was in the 6th grade, and at KCOP Channel 13 at Willoughby and La Brea, we went on Children from Her Classroom, and we danced a number she had choreographed to the song The Hustle. So that kind of excited me in a very particular kind of way. I did my first commercial in the 6th grade for Funny Face, which was like Kool-Aid. You might remember Funny Face. Mm-hmm. So that time was very special. But then it was 17 years old at Hamilton High School. And Mr. Robert Jerkowski, who was our drama teacher, and we had the great Dr. William Tiefert there at Hamilton as our musical teacher. But Mr. Jerkowski gave me Paul Laurence Dunbar's The Antebellum Sermon. And I performed it one night on stage at Hamilton High School. And the way that audience received whatever it is I was doing, they sent a spirit and an energy back to me that touched me in an extraordinary way. So those are the 3 seminal moments in my life regarding that sensation and feeling about this journey in the theatrical vineyard. But additionally, Stephen, in my household, my father was a bebop jazz musician, had been a child actor, and both of their parents had been theatricals. So the arts were always valued in my house. It was something that was very, very honorable to pursue. And I never had that kind of, what are you going to really do with your life? Why don't you get a real job? What's your plan B? It was always give yourself in a deeply committed fashion to what it is that you're doing within the arts. And we celebrate you, we encourage you, and we applaud you.
It was a teacher who changed my life as well. I have had a high school theater teacher named Jim Gilchrist. I've talked about him before. And he was my high school theater teacher out in Agora High School, out in Calabasas, Agora. And he just made me and the rest of my classmates feel that being in the theater was the most exciting, passionate, alive thing that you could do. It was magic to him, and thrilling and freeing. And we would all cut our math classes and go down to the theater room to be with, we called him Mr. G for Gilchrist. And he was one of those Pied Pipers, those magic teachers that can ignite a spirit, in a young man or woman. And he just changed my life. I can't overstate how important teachers are, the importance of teaching, of passing it on. Do you teach?
I certainly do. I do. And I think it's important. I find in teaching that to teach is to learn again. Mm-hmm. And it brings such joy. Stephen, I wanted to just ask you a question, if I may.
Yeah.
How did your father's life as a newsman at CBS, leaving the Valley and going to CBS, how did his life touch you within the arts, if at all?
Well, he wasn't as much of a creative thinker as he was a linear thinker. Mm-hmm. He was a newsman, and so he thought in black and white. He thought in terms of accuracy and honesty, integrity. And I tended to be more of a dreamer, I think. There were times when I felt that my father didn't quite get me. But then he was also so proud of me when he would come to see me in plays. I think inside my father's kind of Walter Cronkite, Eric Sevride exterior, Edward R. Murrow. I mean, these were the titans that he grew up with. I think inside that tweed jacket and the pipe, there was an artist wanting to burst out. But so we had an interesting dynamic between the two of us. What I learned most from my father was, I think, responsibility, empathy, a sense of right and wrong.
Well, it's interesting, though, because for me, many years ago, when I watched your play Central Avenue, mm-hmm. Central Avenue has been so germane to my family's history. But when you talk about your father and the accuracy, all of those things, you delved into the research of Central Avenue in such a way that you brought something terribly authentic to the stage. And so those things, we don't think of them as creative, but they certainly work in what we do.
Exactly. I mean, they're still very important skill sets. Absolutely.
Yes.
How did you? It's interesting. You and I have similar paths. Both of us began as actors. I was an actor once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away, and then evolved into running a theater company. Tell me about that transition for you. About transitioning. Oh, I'm not that you've given up acting, because you're still an actor.
Yes.
But, how did that mind shift happen for you of being an actor, primarily an actor, and then standing outside the Ebony Showcase Theater on Washington Boulevard and looking up and feeling, I want to do that, or I want to do something with this building. I can do that. Was that always in you, do you think?
Yes, in a certain kind of way. It's interesting because I only live 400 yards now from the front door of the theater.
So you've moved like 200 yards away from
Yes, exactly. But I have to tell you, when I saw the cornerstone of the Nate Holden Performing Arts Center being poured, something about that touched me. This has been theatrical terra firma here since 1924. This was a silent movie house, a single screen, 750 seats. There was a company here called Jazz at the Metro. They did broadcast from here. And then, of course, the Ebony Showcase came in 1966. but I've always loved the image of the marquee. I've always loved, the fanfare of opening night. But when I saw that theater being built, that part of the impetus for me was, I really got tired, Stephen, of having to turn down plays out of town that were being offered to me or that I would audition for, because I was afraid that I would have missed a pilot that could have changed my life, that could have become a series, or would I have a representation when I came back home? Would my manager or my agents still be with me if I went out of town to do this play? And I would drive my children to school every day, and I would look over at this theater being built, and I said, will this become a white elephant? What will be inside of those walls? And I thought, well, you know one thing? I saw in the landscape of the 500 square miles that is Los Angeles, I felt that there was a need, a necessity to really, really form a theater company. And I feel very deeply that each people should tell its own story. And I feel that very deeply. And so I began to think very deeply about founding the Ebony Repertory Theatre. I produced 2 events here in 2006. We took over in 2008.
Right.
But I produced a weekend called The Confessions of Stephen Sachs, re-examining the Black image in mass media. And then we produced the West Coast Memorial for the great Lloyd Richards here. And so that is how I got to the Holden itself. And I started working with the late, great Israel Hicks, who
Right.
was a complete and absolute giant, who co-founded this company with me. He was the chairman and the artistic director of the Rutgers, there at Rutgers at the Mason Gross School of the Arts. And then, of course, he had for 20 years been at SUNY Purchase, taught at Temple, taught at Carnegie Mellon, taught at Juilliard. And so we came together to found this company, but it was born out of really feeling that there was a necessity. And this community is surrounded with so many artists who have appeared on your stage there at the Fountain, that I said, let's give this a shot. And so we began to put together a kitchen cabinet of 5 people, wrote a white paper regarding the vision, and then just things began to fall into place. And we were awarded the theater in August of 2007, and we made our debut in February of 2008.
Now, I found this quote of you talking about your vision for the theater, which I'd like to share with you and have you comment on. You say here, the standard you would get at those venues, meaning I think larger mid-sized theaters in Los Angeles, is what I always felt this community deserved. So from a production perspective, that was a vision of mine, to bring that high standard right into this building, to present the finest theater, the finest actors, the finest music, the finest lecturers, and the finest dance. So that's the vision that was for this building and the founding of Ebony Repertory Theatre. A lot of focus on standard, high quality, bringing it to this community and this building. Tell me more about that.
I talked about my family, being born into this theatrical family. My father's artistry was of a high standard. He would go into the woodshed to do his work. My grandfather, my mother's father, Lee Young Sr., was a man of high standards. His father, Papa Young, taught those standards to my Aunt Irma, to my Uncle Lester, and to my grandfather, Mr. Lee Young Sr. My grandfather, Troy Brown, leaving Memphis, Tennessee, finding his way to New York City, finding his way to the London Palladium in 1933. There were standards involved. And those people in my family and other artists have always represented the Anti-Defamation League for Black people in my mind. Whenever Leontine Price took a stage, she was a part of our Anti-Defamation League. I felt that way about Nancy Wilson, about Lena Horne, about Dorothy Dandridge, about Paul Robeson. So those standards were really, really vitally important to me. Those are the standards that I was raised with. My grandmother, who was a chorus girl as well as a torch singer, when we would go to the theater, I remember going to see The Wiz at the Amundsen, the first national tour in 1975 or 6. And I remember my grandmother would unroll Tootsie Rolls prior to the performance. And she never wanted noise while we were watching the performance. And so she would very, very gently pass a Tootsie Roll down with a Tootsie Roll that had already been unwrapped. That kind of etiquette, I wanted to see that right at the heart of the Black community. I feel my community deserves that. And so Black life matters to me, our heritage, our traditions, our civic life, our religious life, our political life, our intellectual life. Black life matters to me. And those standards that I just did not witness only in Black, but the standards that I saw Gordon Davidson put in place there at the Mark Taper Forum, and the work that he had done previously at UCLA, the work that Mr. C. Bernard Jackson was doing, which was my first theatrical home, the Inner City Cultural Center.
Inner City, yeah.
Yes, to watch the great Bea Richards do her work, to watch Paul Winfield and Rosalind Cash and Glenn Turman and Lawrence Hilton Jacobs. It was extraordinary. It was extraordinary. So I felt that we had to be a professional theater working under an Actors Equity Agreement, because I was a third generation member of that union, and I wanted to use these 400 seats and this 40,000 square foot venue to ensure that from an actorial perspective, but those standards and class, dignity, and integrity have been germane to my life. And so that's what I wanted the Ebony Repertory Theater to be imbued with.
And now that you've been doing it now for 13 years, what in your mind is an Ebony Rep play? When you're looking at, you're reading plays, looking for plays, do plays come to you? Do you actively seek them out? Is it a combination of both?
Well, one of the things that we were able to do with Israel Hicks before we lost him in 2010, we put together 20 plays that we wanted to do as our first blush. And we haven't had a chance to do all 20 yet. But the reality of it is, it really is a deep examination of Black life. Again, telling our own story. So the work of Philip Hayes Dean, the next work that we're going to be doing is a Philip Hayes Dean play called Sty of the Blind Pig. I mean, this is one of the most underproduced plays around, and it is an extraordinary play. 4 characters, extraordinary play that examines the nuances of the Pentecostal church, Black life within the specificity of that construct, what it means to bring the historical trope from the plantation in her brother, Doc, he's a dandy. What does that mean to see a dandy whose time has passed? What does it mean when we're sitting in there and we're unwilling to change, or changes happen all around us and we're stuck in a kind of calcified fashion? So we're examining that work next, and we look at those plays that really, in a very nuanced way, examine Black life.
Do you, looking at the plays that you've been doing over the years, and have you done many new plays, or working with new playwrights, developing new Black writers?
Well, that is a part of our mission to do so. We haven't had a chance to bring new plays, to bear yet, but that's a part of what we absolutely want to do. We have a lot in the queue, but funding is vitally important, Stephen, as you well know.
I know.
Vitally important. Workshops, bringing a playwrights lab together, bringing a director's lab together. That's all a part of what we've designed as a part of our blueprint. And we're just working assiduously to get the resources. And first and foremost, our desire is to get those resources from within our community to support this vitally important work of the theater, because I feel the work of the theater is essential. I don't believe that it's a cherry with whipped cream on the top of something. I believe it's essential to the life of a country, the life of a community. And so that's what our goal is, to implement the larger blueprint that has already been drawn. And that's what we're hopeful to do as we come out of this pandemic.
Well, that would be so exciting to have a new playwriting unit at Ebony Rep. That would be fantastic. And you mentioned how the pandemic shut down your production there. How is Ebony Rep holding up during this shutdown period? And what has it done to the organization financially and spiritually? Is the community rallying around it?
Yes.
Good.
Stephen, we're in good shape.
Good.
I thank God for that. We are in very, very good shape. Good. Interestingly, in November, we got a notification that they wanted to do a wonderful repair and replace of things here at the theater. So the funding had come in November of last year. And then it was to go before City Council in March for the approval. Well, the approval came, and they needed 90 to 100 days to do the work. And guess what? Right after they approve it, this pandemic hit. And so we are in a renovation time here at the theater. I'm telling you, new carpet in the lobby has been laid, wonderful new tile in the lobby and in concessions. They're going into the theater. We're going to have a brand new deck. We're going to have our trap doors tweaked. We're going to have a brand new Marley, because one of our resident dance companies, Garth Fagan and his dance company, and Pat Taylor and her Jazz Antiqua company, they are in here in residence. And so to have a brand new Marley there, we're getting the new sound web done and a lot of electrical things done. So we're in a repair and replace mode. And we're very, very happy about that. But thank you for asking the question. We are doing and faring very, very well.
I was interested to see the Dance at the Holden program that you do there. That is that's an Ebony Rep
Yes.
program.
Yes.
How did that come about, and your interest in dance and using dance as a component to theater? We at the Fountain, of course, do something similar with flamenco. We've been producing flamenco for over 25 years, so we
Yes.
do the same thing. So tell me about your experience.
Well, I'm a great, great lover of dance, but I will tell you, our brilliant managing director, Gail Hooks, you know Gail.
Mm-hmm.
Gail was for 20 years, I think, the managing director of the Jazz Tap Ensemble. Gail has been a devotee of dance her whole professional career. She has managed dancers and dance companies. She has booked dancers and dance companies. And so Dance at the Holden was vitally important to, you know, the breadth of what it is that we do here at Ebony Repertory Theatre. And so Gail first came on as our director of dance presentation. And when our beloved first general manager, Malcolm K. Darrell, Malcolm got a wonderful opportunity to go down to the Mark Taper Forum to CTG. Gail then moved in to not only the general manager role, but she moved into the managing director role. And we were putting together Dance at the Holden at that time, because again, we've had Rafael Amargo and his flamenco company here. That was the first dance we ever presented. We had Complexions Contemporary Ballet here with Desmond Richardson and Dwight Roden. And so dance is a huge, huge part of the life of Ebony Repertory Theatre.
That's wonderful. I was so excited to see that. I've been thinking a lot about also August Wilson and his keynote speech that he gave to TCG in 1996, the ground on which I stand, which I'm sure you're aware of. It was
Absolutely.
Yeah, for those who may not know, August Wilson gave this keynote address at Theater Communications Group at a conference at Princeton in 1996. And I was there, actually. I happened to be there that night. And he delivered this address that's become a landmark keystone keynote address, the ground on which I stand, speaking about the importance of Black theater in this country and about blind casting and the importance of Black theater companies, about forming Black theater companies in this country. And I can't help but think of you and applaud you for what you have done, because you have done that. And this is what you have done. And you've done it on the ground on which you stand.
Yes.
As a Black man, as a Black theater artist, as an Angelino. So how has the city that you've grown up in and the ground on which you stand shaped you and Ebony Repertory Theatre?
Thank you so much, Stephen, for stating what you've just stated. It really touches me in a very, very special way, because this ground is sacred to me.
Yeah.
Los Angeles is sacred to me. The Black community, I'm unashamedly, unapologetically a Black man, a Black theater artist. I'm a Black father, I'm a Black husband. I do not shy away from that. And I think that it is vitally important when I think about the wonderful work historically that the Roby Theater has done.
Yes.
When I think about Town Street Theater, when I think about now the Lower Depth Ensemble and other places, these theaters are really, really germane to this landscape. I think we have an opportunity to see one another as whole when we are able to do this. And I must say to you, as I talk about this ground, Stephen, I have to tell you that I have never seen a theater anywhere in this nation that has absolutely brought humanity to the stage with diversity and inclusion any better than the Fountain Theater. I have to tell you that. It is vitally important as we sit here as friends and colleagues, but I have watched the work. I have had an opportunity to work there in a capacity, only doing a reading, but I have been a repository of this work for close to 30 years. And I celebrate you and what you feel about humanity. So I just had to say that. But no, vitally important to me, again, that this work be done, that it be done by Black people, that the sensitivity and the sensibility that we have about our own work and about our community, that we have a voice here. It's vitally important because in the landscape, we were not really seen with the kind of regularity. We were not really reached to with the kind of regularity that I feel our community deserved. And that's why I wanted to give myself with completeness to bringing to bear something that my community and then the larger community could be proud of.
And you do it with such natural authority and grace, authority in the proper meaning, and such grace because you come from this soil. I mean, this is your home, and you've grown up on these streets. And to me, it's just so powerfully moving what you're doing on Washington Boulevard.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
And I want to, you bring up about what's happening, I think, now in our country, certainly in the nation, in our city, and in the American theater, and in Los Angeles
yes,
as well. The rise, of course, of the Black Lives Movement. And I'm very interested in, obviously, in what is happening with Black theater artists and the calling out of what is no longer tolerable and what needs fixing and who needs to fix it. I was wondering if you have seen the We See You White American Theater
yes,
statement.
yes.
And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the We See You statement speaks eloquently to the outrage that many Black theater artists and indigenous artists and people of color feel with regard to not being seen historically in the Lord theaters around the country, and certainly the commercial acme of theater in this country, Broadway. So the Black Theater United, I saw something that they produced recently, a brilliant video, which dealt with coming together. I think that these moments of outrage, of of righteous indignation, I think they're vitally important. But something that I feel is even more important than dealing with the Lord theaters and dealing with Broadway is the investment in the self. I mean to tell you, I think it's vitally important that we institution build where culturally specific theaters are concerned everywhere in this nation where we can. Because wherever there is a Black populace and wherever there is a dominant culture populace, you can learn and you can teach mightily and profoundly on the stages in every city where we can build an institution that holds standards that represent us well. And so that's the larger moment for me. I really want to see the investment in the self. I think that the outrage is necessary. I think having meaningful conversation is necessary because at the end of the day, Black lives have always mattered to white people in this country, but they've always mattered from a perspective of exploitation. If you wanted to subjugate a people, then we've mattered. If you want to exploit a people, then Black lives have mattered. And so we have to move that into the notion of equity, fair play, and justice. And so I'm hopeful that our colleagues in the larger theaters around this country really deal with themselves, take the inward journey, and really deal with the fact that the position of the heart has to change. And the only way the heart can change is if you desire it to change. And so I think these movements are profoundly necessary.
Talk to me about power. And I couldn't agree with you more that this is a moment for many of us for inward looking, even before we get to action steps. It's a moment of reflection and taking an inward inventory of ourselves, I think. And I think a lot of that has got to come from theaters, the systemic white privilege in the American theater, and having to look at itself and acknowledge the role that it is playing and perpetuating. But it's also about power. It's about the giving over of power, who holds the power and the sharing of power. and how sharing and negotiating power makes all of us more powerful. What are your thoughts on that? Have you the times when you have felt powerless or powerful?
Well, you know, I've been blessed in my life, Stephen. What you're talking about is a redistribution of wealth in from a power perspective. But I believe the first and most important power is self-love, is self-appreciation, is self-respect, because you don't ever want to go into a situation, have anyone else define you for you.
Right.
You don't ever want that. So if you take a powerless disposition to a powerful entity, there's no way in the world that you can extract power from that moment. But if you have self-love, self-respect, self-appreciation, then you can go as a more whole person to these institutions and these bastions where power is held. And people with power don't really want to relinquish it. They don't want to relinquish it. But the reality of it is that we have to do it, and we have to go with integrity. We have to go with principles, but we have to go with fire. We have to go with grace. I'm always reminded of the great Nelson Mandela when he was released from Robben Island, that he came out of there and immediately became a statesman because his humanity was on display, his grace was on display. But there are some times when you have to speak in the most beautiful terms, and then sometimes you have to go down and get in the muck and the mire and get in the mud and make it ugly, because it's not pretty at all times. So I think it's vitally important to go and address these situations where power is held, and power has to be relinquished, and you have to keep your foot on the gas pedal. You can't take it off. You can't take it off, because the reality of it is that if we look at legal precedent through this history, we look at Dred Scott, we look at Plessy v. Ferguson, we look at Brown v. Board of Education, we look at Virginia v. Loving, we look at Shelley v. Kramer. I mean, the reality of it is that I think a part of the narrative that has been confused is that there was never a desire to, I want to sit next to you at the counter at Woolworths. The desire was, I want to have a right to sit there. And so we're dealing with something that we need to disentangle in a major, major way. And the great birth defect of America is racism. And so we have to deal with it in real terms. The Black experience is a very unique and specific experience in this country. The new language of people of color, these are very different experiences. Ultimately, they're all a part of one, but specifically to the Black journey, it's vitally important, again, that we institution build and that we find a way to tell our own stories, and that we reach out to funders and other people who can place value on the sense that you've placed value on yourself as well.
So many theater companies now, almost every one, have already published statements of anti-racism, statements of equity, of equality. And I'm wondering what your feeling is about them, and how do we get past finely crafted statements of equality and get to real change in the American theater? I'm talking about in theater.
Yes, of course. The proof of the pudding is in the tasting. We're gonna have to wait and see. People can draft beautiful letters. Companies can draft beautiful letters. These are creative people in many instances who are immensely talented and in fact brilliant in many instances. But the proof of the pudding is in the tasting.
Their job is to perform.
Without question. But you know, I'm dealing beyond anti-racism. I'm interested in anti-terrorism. Black people have been terrorized in this country.
Yeah.
And we've also, as a microcosm, been terrorized in the theater. We have been told that we really don't count with any consistency. We count every now and again. I mean, there were more Black shows on Broadway at one time with runs of over 400 performances in the 70s than we've had in 2000, in 1995. So we have to look at these realities and say, hey, there is a way to do better and we must do better, but we have to, again, keep our foot on the gas pedal so that change can come. Change has to come, and you can't let up, because at the end of the day, I have never seen people who are in control and who have absolute power. They're not interested in relinquishing that power.
Right. You mentioned Lower Depths and Roby Theater Company and Town Street, and there's also Watts Village and others as well. But Los Angeles is also a theater of over 200 theater companies. And we are a large city and an incredibly diverse city. Our Los Angeles theater community ranges from the large Amundsen Theater to the smallest little storefront down in Venice. So there's a wide variety, and we have, I think, theater companies that vary in style, in aesthetic. They do it. We have immersive theater companies. We have classical theater groups, improv companies, new works, all kinds of variety there. We do have a deaf theater company where there's Asian, Latino, but in your mind, does the Los Angeles theater landscape itself reflect the landscape of our city? And when you look across the landscape of the Los Angeles theater community, what do you see? And I guess more importantly, what do you want to see?
Well, I think that when we talk about the 200 odd companies, sure, I think that the landscape of Los Angeles is well represented then. But when you talk about the companies that get the largest the largest word count in the LA Times, the largest word count in their reviews or the stories that are done about them, these companies among the 200 are not well reflected at all. And so that's vitally important as well, because unfortunately, we don't really have and never have historically had many Black critics who come to the theater in law. And that's vitally important to get that point of view from someone who has come through the same experience. Vitally important that way. So I think that when we talk about, my grandfather used to refer to Los Angeles as a country town, because 500 square miles is, it's very small, but it's very large at the same time. So again, 200 odd companies, I do believe represents the landscape. But when we're talking about paying a living wage, when we're talking about communities really being able to see themselves as whole, going and seeing themselves, that diversity is not as it should be. That inclusion is not as it should be. And I believe that, again, I find what you have done at the Fountain with Deborah and Simon and certainly the late Ben, that you've been a tremendous exemplar of what that kind of diversity could represent in the 99-seat world. And it has just been exquisite to come onto Fountain Avenue and see the work through the years. And again, to see the humanity more particularly, because there is a regard for all of humanity at the Fountain Theater. And I believe that if the position of the heart and the mind and the spirit can really, really find itself landing in these other places, we can have an extraordinary city where theater is concerned.
Tell me, what kind of some examples of some institutional racism that you encountered coming up either as an actor or in trying to get Ebony Rep on its feet, coming into the Nate Holden? Did you?
How much time do you have, Stephen?
Yeah.
I could cite so many things. For instance, I remember when we did, our revival, and it wasn't a revival, but this is what it was called. Variety was unwilling to send a critic to the theater to review the directorial debut of Phylicia Rashad in Los Angeles. They said, well, it's a revival and we don't do revivals. And I said, you mean to tell me if Sean Penn did Death of a Salesman at the Geffen Playhouse, you wouldn't go review it?
In a heartbeat.
Anyway, I had to write them. We had to fight to get them here. And you remember Bob Verini? Yes. Bob came out and reviewed it. He was touched by the work. He wrote one of the most majestic love letters we've ever received. But that kind of fight from that perspective, going in and understanding, even at my union, going in and navigating contracts there at Actors Equity. I mean, you're going in and you're trying to fight your letter of agreement. So many ways that I could talk about. But at the end of the day, the eyes here have been stayed on the prize and not the prizes. We know that those impediments are going to be there, but we have worked through them. And so we've been very, very fortunate that way. But I could cite for another hour,
I'm sure,
many things, with great specificity that have been institutional roadblocks for me personally and for Ebony Repertory Theater.
An interesting question from a viewer. which I think raises an interesting a topic as well. She's saying how this conversation is so encouraging to her, and that she's been an actress for 40 years, and she got to go to the Nate Holden Performing Arts Center for the Tribute to Negro Ensemble to honor Robert Hooks, and she's so excited by the community. And she wants to know, Wren, if you allow white actresses over 60 to become involved in your company. And I also notice on your mission statement about wanting to build multicultural audiences and to bring all members of the community together. So how would you answer an actress?
Well, firstly, absolutely, she's welcome. And when the work calls for it specifically, she's most welcome. Of course, absolutely. I mean, we are a culturally specific theater. We are a Black theater company, but the welcome is always there. And we want to do works, and we have works that we are preparing to do that might fit her eye. So absolutely, she is welcome.
Here's a question, Wren. What project are you most proud of as an actor yourself?
A short film directed by Blair Underwood called The Second Coming. Blair Underwood plays Christ, a contemporary Christ returning to this earth with dreadlocks. And I play a character opposite Blair Underwood. And the work that we were able to do in The Second Coming really stands for me in a very special way. So that is probably my first of my favorite pieces of work that I've done.
And what about as a director? Is there a project that is a special Valentine in your heart as a director?
Well, you know, I'm a new director. And I must tell you that directing the august Carol Foreman, most recently as Lady Day, Billie Holiday, directing that work and examining that life, examining that brilliant artistry, examining those times in the world where she came out of, and the world of jazz, the world of traveling and being again a person who is a representative. That work particularly touched me in a very special way. It caused me to lose rest because it was in my mind all night. You know, it was in my spirit all night. But I was very pleased to wake up unrested because it was a good lack of sleep, because I was able to come to the rehearsal room and hopefully to give Carol and Stefan Terry, who played Jimmy Powers, my best. And so that work stands out thus far of the work I've directed.
I have a question for you, Wren, because this is something that I have to find balance in, and I'm wondering if you have any magical words of wisdom or advice for me. It's about balancing. When you're an artistic director, when you're the leader of a theater, balancing the administrative life and the artistic and your artistic self. And there's also, of course, your family self as well. Finding that kind of balance, how to avoid when you're sitting in a rehearsal, watching a rehearsal, but you're thinking about how many rolls of toilet paper have we bought for the building, and I've got to do the payroll, and we have to do these contracts, and how do you find the left brain, right brain aspect of running a theater?
What allows me to breathe more easily than I would be breathing otherwise is the brilliant Gail Hooks. From an administrative perspective, I say that Gail Hooks is like the finest pianist in the world. She's my left hand and she's my right. She's Oscar Peterson, she's Art Tatum, she's Vladimir Horowitz. She is an extraordinary administrator, and she supports me and has my back in a way that's unparalleled. So I'm able to go into the rehearsal hall and really, really deal with the work that way. But as a part of the larger discussion, family has always been first for me. Family is first and foremost. My family informs my life in a very specific way. I'm a better human being because of my wife. I'm a better human being because of my 3 children. They cause me to awaken excitedly every single day and to bring what they give me at home and the understanding and the real support mechanism that family can represent. I've had that. And so that's been, a breath of fresh air for me as well.
I have that as well. I have that too. Very strong sense of family, and they are my rock. Here's a question for you, Wren. What does Mr. Brown feel is his role and responsibility to the Black community in the position of founder of Ebony Rep? So that is an interesting question. That do you feel that you not only are an artistic leader of a specific theater organization, but your role as a community leader as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think about the great artists of yesteryear. Every time they would come on television or do a film or step on a stage, there was the burden of representing the race, representing the community, representing the race. I embrace that reality. I embrace it. I want to always represent myself and my family. And if I represent myself in the way that is embraceable by me and by my family, I then represent my community well, because it is really for me about integrity. It is about dignity. It is about having immutable principles in this role as a cultural leader. So I take it very, very seriously. And anywhere I find myself, I try to represent Wren Troy Brown and his family, my extended family, and the family of Ebony Repertory Theatre, and the people of this community and the people of this city. I want to represent us well at every turn. And so I embrace that reality. It's a burden of privilege.
How do Black theater artists get involved at Ebony Rep? Do you have regular audition? First of all, actors. How do actors get involved in your production?
Well, we always, for every production, we have equity calls, for every production we do. But at the end of the day, being a practitioner myself, being one who has supported the members of my community through the 35 years, and now, I beg your pardon, now the 38 years that I've been a member of this community as a professional, I have a Rolodex of friends. These are not just people who happen to be actors or happen to be directors or happen to be designers. I have abiding relationships for years and for years. And I am praying for the day that we can be a fully operational theater where we offer a season of 3 or 4 plays and some pageant around Christmas time and times in between. So not only can all of these brilliant colleagues of mine come here to do the work, but that we can bring the coming generation on as well to train with and work with and learn from these elders of this experience. And so, yeah, that's how we do it, through the traditional reach of auditions, but also candidly and frankly,
yeah,
my Rolodex.
Exactly. Can a young actor who is not a member of Actors Equity audition for a production at Ebony?
Absolutely. Welcome anyone who comes here. You know that there are rules with regard to equity auditioning, but absolutely you are welcome. And I will stay until 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, and to make sure that everyone is seen and that they really have a real fair shot. Because if you come in and do the work in a special way, there's a likelihood you could be hired.
And that's an important opportunity, because a young actor who is not a member of the union could get a role at your theater and become a union member. Is that correct? They can join the equity?
Absolutely, because they'll have a contract.
Right.
And so for instance, I got my equity card at the Mark Taper Forum.
So did I.
Yeah, see there?
I did too.
Common ground, Stephen Sachs.
Yeah, that's right.
But I got one there doing a reading.
Mm-hmm.
I became eligible first doing a reading there. And so I want to be able to, again, have the kind of resources where those kinds of contracts within readings and things like that, we can bring more members on, because for me, it is vitally important to have a pension and health contribution, to be able to earn a living wage and to retire and say, I worked at Ebony Repertory Theatre 5 times. That's very important to me, and it's important to us here at Ebony Rep. And so absolutely, that's a goal and a desire for us.
Is a long-term dream to have a real company where everyone is salaried?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was
always
impacted by the repertory company at Lincoln Center.
Yeah.
Under Jules Irving, of course,
right.
And also the APA Phoenix under the great Ellis Rabb at the Lyceum Theater in New York City.
Right.
I looked at those models. The actor-manager tends to be an English tradition in the minds of many, but I watched those 2 men and their companies very closely as I came into my awareness of what the theater is and what the theater could be. And so we would absolutely love to have our repertory company built with a group of actors, a group of designers, and all stage managers representing truly a company. We would love to do that. That is our long-term goal.
And while we are under this pandemic blanket, what kind of activities, if any, are Ebony Rep doing? Are you doing online play readings or
we haven't been doing any of that, Stephen. As you know, I recently lost my mother. Mm-hmm. And so the pandemic and all of our children at home and really going through the mourning process where mom is concerned has really kept me in a very still way. Yes. But what we've begun to do for the theater, we have just launched our new website, which we wanted to do. And so we're doing things like that. And we are hopeful in the coming weeks to be able to present some things, because we have a lot of things that we desire to present with regard to virtual readings and things of that nature. So yes, it is our desire, but I've had to be still so that I'm not a person dealing in madness.
Yes. If a playwright wants to send you a play that he or she feels would be right for your company, how do they do that?
Oh, well, submissions are not open right now, but traditionally it would be the traditional literary submission from that perspective, because again, we have about 8 plays left that we designed with Israel that we want to bring to the stage. And with about 4 more plays in, we're going to be really then accepting, the submissions for these new works.
Yes, somebody in the chat is saying that it just so happens that they have a film script based on the life of Biddy Mason and would like to adapt the piece into a play. They want to know if they can send it for your consideration for a playwrights unit maybe in the future.
Absolutely. Biddy Mason, that story is vitally important. This woman, the founding of First AME Church at 8th and Town, the owning of 7th and Broadway, that corner, this woman who had been enslaved came here. I think her pilgrimage was from Utah to Los Angeles, the final pilgrimage she made. And extraordinary story, vitally important story. So certainly make that adaptation work.
This is a financial question. Where did the money come? Who were some of the major donors that helped Ebony Rep become in residence at the Nate Holden? Who are some of the larger sponsors and the community holders that helped make that happen?
Well, I have to tell you, Sandra Evers Manley and her support from Northrop Grumman, mm-hmm. her leadership there has been vitally important to us. Ordinarily, I wouldn't call these names, but I think it's vitally important because 2 personalities who were on our board at the very beginning, were the households of Pauletta and Denzel Washington, mm-hmm. and LaTanya Jackson and Samuel L. Jackson. Those 2 households supported us in a very, very special way. Our first board chair, our present board chair, Paul Hudson, their support at Broadway Federal Bank was vitally important to us. And so those 3, and the wonderful, wonderful writer, Yvette Lee Bowser. Mm-hmm. Yvette is a dear friend and colleague, and Yvette, her support and her family support of us early on. So those were the early supporters here at Ebony Repertory Theatre.
Yeah, and they need to be acknowledged. These are warriors for the arts.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm looking to see if there's, again, and last one final question while we still have time.
Stephen, I'm drinking a lot of water, and I thank you for allowing me because I'm in menopause. So forgive me.
No, it's been just a pleasure to speak with you, Wren, and I'm just in awe of what you've done and what you continue to do and how you inspire audiences and artists and the community. Is just very moving, and I'm here for you. My heart is with you always, and the fountain is always with you.
Oh, Stephen, yeah. It's a 2-way street.
Yeah.
I so appreciate you. I appreciate the Fountain. I appreciate your heart. And I thank you for that. Do we have any more questions? Do we have any more time?
Actually, we're out of time. So we have to kind of wrap this up.
Okay.
I wish it could go longer.
I do as well.
Yeah. So give my love to your family.
Likewise to yours. And Stephen, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to have been here with you today. This has been really, really, really greatly enjoyable for me.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. And for those of you who are watching online, if you want to learn more about Ebony Rep and what's going on and the new website, take a look at their website. And what is the website?
www.ebonyrep.org.
So have a look and see what they're doing, and keep an eye out when they start to step out into with a digital presence and submit your plays and your pictures and resumes, because Ebony Rep is a company that has earned a respect and our support in the community, and is a flagship theater in our city. So hooray. All right, so that's it for today for Theater Talk. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Wren Brown and James Bennett backstage, and all of you for joining us today. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.